Also, ich möchte mich zuerst bedanken. Ja, sie kann Deutsch reden. Thank you, thank you. Ich möchte mich zuerst bedanken. Sie kann aber nicht sehr gut Deutsch reden. Ich möchte mich zuerst bedanken. Ich bin sehr glücklich, in München zu sein. Und hoffentlich werden wir noch in den nächsten Stunden zusammen viel lernen und auch viel Spaß haben. Now I'm going to switch to English. Okay, so I have a lavalier mic on, which means that I can move around a lot, and that's what I plan to do. And I also plan, I'm going to tell you this in advance, to use, I have a little bit of extra time because I think some parts of the morning perhaps went more quickly than was originally intended. So I'm going to speak actually quite briefly and fairly rapidly, and I'm then going to, before we turn to the panel, assuming it's okay with our leaders, to take some questions and comments from the audience so that we can maybe play a slightly more active role this afternoon than we were able to do this morning. So I should tell you about myself, some of you may know this already, that I am a leadership contrarian. So everything you hear from me, 99.9% of my colleagues disagree with. And I will tell you a little bit about how this all started. I'm in Germany, so I'm going to be very alert to the impact this has, but it's the truth. About 12, 15 years ago, I had already been in the field of leadership for many years and was writing many books and articles on leadership and teaching it. But it dawned on me about 12, 15 years ago that my field, which is about leadership study and leadership development, was incredibly skewed. Now, how was it skewed? This morning, the question was raised about the meaning of these, particularly these two words, maybe even more, what does the word progress mean? And I think we agreed it means different things to different people. The word leadership, however, as I don't have to tell a group in Germany, has come in the late 20th and 21st century to be as if the word good were in front of the word leadership. So when we say I'm taking a leadership course or I'm learning how to be a leader, it is assumed that we're taking a course on good leadership. It is assumed that we're learning how to be a good leader. So about 15 years ago, I wrote a small pamphlet which I called Hitler's Ghost, a Manifesto. Now, what did I mean by Hitler's Ghost, a Manifesto? I meant, and I mean to this day, that I do not understand a field of leadership, which is my field, that spends 99.999, if not 100% of its time studying good leadership, as opposed to also considering bad leadership. Why don't we pay any attention to bad leadership? Now, in the case of Hitler, that's the extreme, evil, but there are many different kinds and permutations of bad leadership. Why do we not, if we're in an organization, for example, pay attention to how to get rid of a bad boss? How many of you have never, and I say never, had a bad boss? You're very lucky. You're very, very lucky. Overwhelmingly, people, when you say how many of you've had a bad boss, people say, I know what you're talking about. But it's curious how difficult it is to get rid of the bad bosses. Where people agree there's a high level of incompetence, sometimes either unethical, whatever. Oh, but we don't really, we talk about it, we whisper about it, go to the water cooler and bitch and moan about it. We don't know what to do about it. And leadership teaches us nothing about how to get rid of bad leaders, however defined. To me, that's nuts. So I wrote a book called Bad Leadership. See, that's funny. It's not so funny. You open up a newspaper, you turn on the television, you go on the internet, guess what? It is full of bad leadership. I'm not talking about something rare or unusual or esoteric. The world is full of bad leaders. Leadership doesn't touch it. The field of leadership, you walk into a bookstore, you go to a course on leadership, it's about good leadership, good leadership, good leadership. The book Bad Leadership taught me one thing about bad leadership. One big thing about bad leadership. You can't do bad leadership without bad followers. It doesn't happen. There is no example in human history of a bad leader who was able to do what he or she wanted to do alone. There are always other players who participate. Now, the field of leadership will talk sometimes about the follower, but it doesn't actually pay much attention. Nobody gives a damn about being a good follower. I teach a course at the Kennedy School from time to time called Followership. And as soon as the word follower is in the title, I get fewer students than if the word leader is in the title. The people who go to the Kennedy School go to themselves, what the hell do I want to learn anything about follow? I'm here, excuse me, I'm at Harvard to learn how to be a leader. Nobody acknowledges, virtually nobody acknowledges the importance of the follower. By the way, I have run into trouble by using the word follower, because in English anyway, it's equated with being a sheep. You're not interesting, you're not creative, you're not innovative. I would argue, and I'll talk as an American here, that much of the problems of, quote, leadership in the United States are actually about followership. It's about the American people that don't give a damn about politics anymore. Less than half vote, way less than half in elections other than the presidential election. In Congress, you've heard, even you, I know, in Germany, have heard how dysfunctional our Congress. Why? Because everybody feels they have to be a leader. Nobody is willing to compromise, to go along, to do what it takes to make a successful team or group. So in those two ways alone, I am a contrarian. I talk about bad leadership all the time, not to the exclusion of good leadership, but along with. And along with the leader, I'm talking about the follower. By the way, as I said, the word follower is contentious. People don't like it. So I have bowed to the conventional wisdom, and I will use the word other, or constituent, or subordinate, or some other euphemism, but basically we're talking about leaders and followers. So I'm now going to turn, with that kind of a preface, to my very, very brief PowerPoint. It is the simple, do you know what a simple PowerPoint is? It's one like this. It's got like a couple of slides, 2 words on each slide, maybe a few more on some of the slides. So let me begin with this one. No, that's the one I want to begin with. So I have coined a term for people in the business that I'm in, and I call it the leadership industry. People like me make a living, in some cases, not me, right? Not me, definitely not me, an extremely good living, by claiming to teach people how to lead. It's a big business now, the leadership business, the leadership industry, big damn deal. That's kind of what we're all in this room for. I have, as you intimated, some grave reservations about the leadership industry. I never tell my students I'm going to teach them how to lead, never. I tell them, if you want to know about leadership, about followership, take my course. If you want to learn how to lead, you're in the wrong room. Nevertheless, very big deal. The leadership industry. By the way, it's very new. People have always been interested in leadership from the beginning of human history, but the industry is only about 40 years old. And if you want to know why that's the case, I can go into it in another point. Now, when I wrote about leadership and then followership, it began dawning on me that the industry was skewed in ways that I've alluded to before. And since then, I've written another book, which I will talk about in a moment, called The End of Leadership, and another one called Hard Times, Leadership in America, both of which have persuaded me to never again talk about leadership, but only about the leadership system. The leadership industry is 99.9% fixated on the person at the top. Sometimes it's the persons at the top. It's about the individual. Learning how to lead is often about self-improvement, skill development. I'll have various experiences. It'll be completely great. I'll improve me. It's about me. But it is not about what I have decided, what I've concluded, what the real world suggests, the two other components that are flat out part of what have to be considered a system of leadership as opposed to leadership per se. And that system is really, really, really simple. It's got three parts. Leader, none of this is to dismiss the importance of the leader. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying leaders are unimportant. I'm saying they're not the only things that are important. Along with the leader, important is the followers, others, whoever. Hello, you're the CEO of a company. Does anybody else in the company matter? Yes. They matter. You've got to pay attention. Do all others outside the company, your suppliers, your customers, the public at large, the media, do you need to take them into account? Hello? Yes. Leaders, followers, or others. And my newest big thing, and my last big thing, because I'm not going to keep adding because I want to keep the system simple, is context. The situation, it came up a couple of times already this morning. Leadership in America is similar to leadership in Germany, but it is not the same thing as leadership in Germany. Leadership at Google has some similarities to leadership at Amazon, but it is not identical to leadership at Amazon, not to speak of leadership at General Motors. Those contexts matter, about which more later. You all with me? You're here. This is after lunch, by the way. It's good you did not serve wine or beer or liquor, otherwise I'd have you all passed out. Okay. So, the end of leadership, I essentially make two main points, and I'm going to not talk about one and yes, talk about the other. The point I won't talk about, but will touch on, was actually touched on, I think, by you, which is I take on full force the leadership industry. And I talk a lot about what's wrong with it, and I talk some about how it might be improved. This is a multi-billion-dollar global business. It's as big in China as it is in the United States. It's not an American phenomenon, and as far as I'm concerned, it's wrong-headed. That's what I am not going to talk about now. What I am going to talk about is this. I'm going to talk about the arc of human history. How much time do you have?
It's okay.
Don't panic, but it's going to be a very quick history lesson because you can't get what's, you know, all the talk this morning about flattened hierarchies and teams and distributed leadership, that didn't come out of no place. It came out of a historical evolution. I think the word enlightenment did come up this morning, and that plays a role. And I need to explain to you how we are in the 21st century because of where we are in the 20th and the 19th and the 18th and so on. And I'll do it really fast, don't panic. In essence, my argument is that as time goes on, leaders lose. Okay, so I divide leadership into three resources. Am I talking too fast? No. You're here, okay. Three resources: power, authority, and influence. They're all different. Anybody in this room know what Mao said about power? Where does it come from? Mao Zedong. Oh my God, none of you are communists? Did you say not anymore? That was a very funny, that was a very witty response. Thank you. Very good. I like it. I like it. Had I asked 2 decades ago, I would have got an answer. Mao said that power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Now, in leadership literature, you can pick up every damn leadership book that God ever created, and you will not find in it the notion that force has anything to do with leadership. This is all voluntary and persuasive and yada yada. It's all adorable, it's all kumbaya, it's all so much fun and games. Guess what? In the real world, power matters. That, it doesn't have to be a gun. It can be my capacity to fire you if you don't do what I want you to do. That's not influence, that's power. Not going to spend more time on it. The second one is authority. Anybody want to say what authority is associated with? Let me ask you, why are you listening to me? What do you know about me that makes you say, okay, I'll give the woman a half an hour? Harvard. Who said Harvard? Very good answer. She's at Harvard. She can't be a complete idiot. She can be a half an idiot, but probably not a total idiot. What else about Harvard? Do I clean toilets at Harvard? Hello? I'm a professor. So if you know nothing else about me, he also said I wrote a lot of books and oh, she's probably done some stuff that I have authority no matter how stupid or inarticulate I might be. You know about me, I'm from Harvard. You know about me, I'm a professor. You know about me, I've written some books, so you're saying, okay, we'll give the woman a half an hour. That's authority. Influence, I don't have to describe. So, back to this. My argument is that in the 21st century, particularly now we're in the second decade of the 21st century, leaders are losing power and influence, not authority, because by definition they have authority, but they're losing power and influence while followers are gaining power and influence. This is the kind of thing we can talk about. I'm not going to spend too much time on each slide. The trajectory of history. How do I get that to you in 3 minutes? So in the beginning, Plato, you've heard of, how do you say Plato in German? Plato? Plato. Plato wrote, what was his ideal leader? Anybody remember?
Yep, a king.
Yes, you're correct.
King.
Say it loud. Who's talking?
A wise king.
Perfect. The philosopher king. Thank you very much. We've got one educated person in our midst here. Thank you very much. Very good. Very, very good. Thank you. The philosopher king. What did Machiavelli write about? The Prince. His fame. How many of you have read The Prince? Probably most of you. By the way, interestingly, when I ask this question to an American audience, almost everybody raises their hand. It's a big deal in America. The Prince. So in the old days, people were writing about people at the top. Okay, that's what the original leadership literature was about. By the way, I could go back to Confucius, Lao Tzu, everybody was writing about people at the top. Then you had the Enlightenment. Rousseau, Montesquieu, John Locke, I could go on. Now they changed the rules of the game in profound ways that are extremely important to understanding leadership and followership, and that bring us to where we are now. They started talking about doing what with power? I've heard it. Sharing. Oh my God. The king or the president or whoever has to pay attention to a legislature, elected representatives? Unthinkable until the Enlightenment. The phrase that we use in the United States, checks and balances, how many of you have heard that phrase? What does checks and balances mean? Anybody?
To survive the crazy king.
Excuse me?
To survive the
Right,
crazy
the
king.
division of power.
Survive a crazy king, that's a little royalist way of putting it. I'm going to ignore the royalist part. How do you survive the crazy leader? Crazy king, crazy president, crazy prime minister, crazy chancellor. Of course, you've never had a crazy chancellor, so that doesn't count. But I'm just saying, how do you survive it's not so much about being crazy. The assumption is that leaders are greedy for power. And that's why we always need checks and balances. What does checks and balances mean?
Restriction of freedom.
Restrictions on leaders. It is about followers' rights. A check is and a balance is on power. It is about the rights of followers to have their say, especially if they feel or conclude they are not being led wisely and well. All of the Enlightenment was about that. In the 16th, 17th, 18th century. Then you suddenly had all these political awakenings. Suddenly the serfs were freed, the slaves were freed, women's rights. All these various pressures from below, subsequent to the Enlightenment, that's the trajectory of history. Names like Gandhi and Mandela that we heard this morning, Martin Luther King, the various rights revolutions. How many of you have heard of the rights revolutions? Give me some rights. Anybody?
Civil rights.
Civil rights. Others.
Free speech.
The free speech movement at Berkeley, California. Civil rights, free speech, other rights.
Right to vote.
Women's rights, hello, yes, thank you. Women's rights. All these movements, by the way, the early incarnations in the 19th century, then the reincarnations in the 20th. Other rights.
Collective bargaining.
Collective labor rights. Anybody remember Communist Manifesto? Okay, I know you're not communists. We went through this once already. Anybody got the last lines of the Communist Manifesto? Last lines.
It goes through Europe.
That's in the beginning.
Yeah, that's the first line.
So you're going to be so embarrassed when I start because you're all going to finish. Workers of the world,
Unite.
unite. You have nothing to lose
but your chains.
but your chains.
Exactly.
That's what I'm talking about. Revolutions, rights revolutions, workers' revolutions, women's revolutions, black revolutions. Revolutions of people who are disabled in some way. In our country now, you probably have the same thing. The sidewalks all have to be sloped. For wheelchair access, every building has to be wheelchair accessible. Animal rights. Do you have a big animal rights movement in your country? We do in our country. We have changed the way food is manufactured and delivered. Eggs, for example, free-range eggs. All a result of a book that came out in 1975 called Animal Liberation. Animal rights, it's a big deal, and it's part of all these other rights that I'm talking about. These are the rights, these are the pressures from below rising up. This is leaders losing, followers gaining, all part of a piece. Now, in the end of leadership, oh my God, we have so little time. I'm going to talk even faster. In the end of leadership, I say that there are two major reasons why this trend has accelerated even further. One is cultural change. So I used to go into a classroom when I first started teaching, let's say 30, 35 years ago. I know it's hard to believe. And people called me what? What do you think they called me when I went into a classroom? Yeah, I hear it. Say it loud. Professor. Good morning, Professor Kellerman. Good afternoon, Professor Kellerman. Goodbye, Professor Kellerman. Now I walk into a classroom, they call me what? Exactly. The first time I heard it, I went, excuse me? Excuse me? What? Barbara? I'm lucky if they don't call me Barbie or Babs. It's ridiculous. You used to go to a doctor, the doctor would say, take a pink pill, and you would swallow the pink pill. Even maybe the younger ones in this room, 10 years ago. Now the doctor says, take a pink pill, you go and do what? Google. You go onto your internet, you go Google it. If most of the people on Google say take a blue pill, you're going to either take the damn blue pill or you're going to go back to your doctor and say, you idiot, everybody else is saying take a blue pill. In other words, leaders, figures of authority, people in positions of authority, experts. If I wanted to go to a good restaurant in Munich, 20 years ago I would have bought a book written by experts, gastronomes, about how to find a good restaurant in Munich. Now I go online to Yelp or whatever, and people like you and me are telling me which restaurant I should go to. Things have changed. These are cultural changes. By the way, with leaders, I will give you just one American example. The shorthand version of this example is 2 words. 2. The first word is Monica, and the second word I know you can't possibly guess, so I'll tell you, it's Lewinsky. The Monica Lewinsky story gave license to the American press and the American people and the American media to invade a president's private life in ways that previously were unthinkable. I will spare you the details. Suffice it to say, when we do something like that to our leaders, by the way, in France, it just happened with Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Exactly. We knew that he was screwing around right. Can I say screw in Germany? So we knew that he was screwing around right and left. Everybody knew that. But now we've learned a level of detail about this that would have been previously unthinkable. Those are cultural changes. They enable us to take our leaders down. They make us all equal in a way that we were not previously. They're really important if you're talking about patterns of leadership and followership. The other change, again, I don't have time. There is almost no literature on how technology has changed the balance of power between leaders and followers, but it so obviously has. Everybody has similar information. Everybody has the freedom of expression, by the way, often anonymously, which enables you to say horrible things about people in positions of authority, again, in unprecedented ways. It enables us to connect, and so forth and so on. A few more key points. The end of leadership that I'm talking about is a global phenomenon. Now, I don't know, I wanted to make this point. People look at China, and anybody who studies China even a little bit, anybody who studies Turkey even a little bit, anybody who studies Russia even a little bit knows that in the last year or 2 or 3, they have become more repressive, more oppressive than before. Why is that? Anybody want to guess?
Because leaders see that they lose their power.
That's exactly right. There is a level of activism all over the place, and unless leaders clamp down, you're going to have happening in China and in Turkey, and you did already see it, by the way, in China and in Turkey, and a little bit in Russia. You're going to see a reenactment of what you've had in Spain and Greece and in other places in the world. So this shift between, it's a growing divergence between autocracies and democracies with major implications for anybody interested in leadership or in followership. Now I'm going to conclude with this. Do I still have like 1 minute? Thank you. Okay. So I earlier mentioned the word context, okay? Now, context is, as I am fond of saying, it's like taking, you know how if you have a flat stone and you throw it into a calm lake, you get concentric circle and concentric circle and concentric circle. That's what context is. So to put it most broadly, you have context within a group or organization or a country, and then you have the country or the group in a larger context. You can go many layers of this. This context matters. My last book, Hard Times, Leadership in America, I talk about the American political context and how 24 different components of context impact on leadership at this moment in time. The same applies for Germany. If you want to understand leadership in Germany, you are going to have to look at the different components of context. They're not up there. I'm going to read you just a few. How does the history of Germany impact on leadership now? If you don't realize that's an important question, then go back to the history books. How does the ideology, economics, politics, institutions, the law, technology, media, money, Again, I'm not going to go through anymore, but I will end with this slide. This slide. So it is putting Germany in a larger context. Interestingly, that has really barely come up today. I don't think maybe it hasn't even come up at all. So I'm an American, I'm visiting Germany, it's March 5th today, what is it, March 5th, the year 2015. From where I stand, this is not only a conversation about leadership within Germany and how we're going to run this company or that company or empowerment or distribute it. It is also about Germany's leadership / followership role in the world. The world has changed. Had I been standing here 1 year ago, the conversation would have been different. There was no ISIS that we knew about. Putin had just taken over Crimea. The issue of Ukraine was not in evidence, but it's not 2014 March. It's 2015 March. And the question of Germany's leadership / followership role in the world, or Germany's role in the world, seems to me a critical one for everyone sitting in this room, and I don't just mean Germans. So we're talking about leadership. What's so great about leadership is it applies across the board. The most interesting conversations about leadership are the ones that ask the most impossible questions. And one of the impossible questions with which you in this room, however, will have to wrestle, young, middle, older, is Germany's role, Germany, in the second decade of the 21st century. I think I will end with that. By the way, I want to leave you hungry. I want to show you how much you've missed. I was going to read aloud a fabulous followership poem by a man by the name of Bertolt Brecht. I don't have time to do it here, but it's called A Worker Reads History. Now, he was a leftist, of course, so I'm not surprised. Go online, A Worker Reads History by Bertolt Brecht. It's all about leadership and followership. It's great. Thank you very much for your time. I don't want to lead, don't clap, don't do anything. I want to ask if anybody has any, can I have 5 more minutes? Organizers, can I have 5? Leaders, can I have 5 more minutes? Yay, okay, 5 more minutes. Questions, comments by anybody? Yes?
You are a professor on public leadership.
Forget
How does
it,
it
wrong.
Yeah.
They call me that, but that's not how I think of
How does
myself.
it apply to companies?
It's,
Just the same?
thank you very much for the question. It's a global phenomenon. Every word out of my mouth applies to leadership in business, leadership in politics, leadership in the military, leadership in education, leadership in China, leadership in Germany, leadership in these phenomena are global tides. The year 1848 is the year the Communist Manifesto came out. It's the same year in the United States you had one of the great manifestos for women in leadership, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's Declaration of Sentiments. These are global, long before globalization, these were global tides. Zeitgeist, all that, the temper of the times. This is across the board. Thank you for the question. Yes?
You mentioned that not
Didn't
many...
you say something this morning?
Yes.
It damn well better be good this time. Okay, go ahead. It's a joke. I'm kidding around. I like to make jokes. It's a joke. It's a joke. Go ahead. Go ahead. Gotta have a good time. Go ahead.
So,
Yes.
so you mentioned about the study of bad leaders.
Yes.
And so are you familiar with the Hogan and Kaiser work, the dark side of discretion, about how leaders with more discretion and personality has a greater impact on the organization?
I am. So can you just say to them what you're talking about?
Well, so I'm just wondering about, what your thoughts are about assessing personality risks in leadership, like with Hogan.
Okay, I am a huge skeptic of that. I used to be a presidential scholar, and there's a literature on psychoanalyzing presidents and how do we do psychological tests of presidents before we even elect them to office. I love psychoanalytical and psychological approaches, so it's not about that. I think the testing is not that great. I also think with leaders in particular, we generally don't have the access that we really need in order to determine psychological traits. So I'm a little edgy about proximity. Do we have enough proximity? Yes,
But
and then
Oh, sorry, you would agree that tighter governance controls.
I'm a big believer that we need rules and regulations. We can't, checks and balances means you can't trust people. In this field, above all other, everything we know about human history, people ask me what I think about Putin. My answer is I have never seen a leader grab a piece of territory and then another piece of territory and wake up the next morning and say, you know, I've had enough. It's good. I'm fine. That's just not how leaders work. So, am I nervous about the man? Yeah, I'm nervous about the man. Past patterns do an awful lot. So, and yes, we need rules and regulations because people can't be trusted. As the founders, that is the American founders, understood perfectly well. Every good constitution is, after all, about checks and balances, and for good reason. Yes?
What is your view on leaders, management, followers in the corporate world when you have a crisis?
Well, you could, again...
I believe that you need somebody
yes,
running the company.
you could ask exactly the same question about what about in a crisis generally.
But in a political crisis, you cannot throw out your people.
It's different, but it's in many ways also the same. In general, the literature suggests, and we know history suggests, that when there is a crisis, we need leadership. Our best example is in the immediate wake of 9/11, the attacks on the World Trade Center. There was a guy who was mayor of New York who would have lost an election had it been held a day earlier. The bombs, the attack on the two buildings, the buildings fell, and suddenly he became America's mayor, a guy by the name of Rudy Giuliani. Many of you may know his name. And for maybe a decade, he rode that because he understood that in a crisis, leadership was needed, and he did it, by the way, very well. But he was a shit the day before, and he was a shit a decade later, and he's a shit still, who just, by the way, questioned Obama's loyalty. You know, does Obama love America enough? But your point is well taken. In a crisis, people want and need leadership, preferably good leadership. But yes, that's absolutely true. A crisis calls generally for leadership.
Well, it's a special context in your friend, right?
Or yes, it is all about the circumstance, the context, the situation, whatever name you want to use. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
What do you think about leadership styles? You talk about the leadership industry,
yes,
and it seems like authentic, ethical, transformation.
Yeah, those
are very popular. What is
yeah, those are all nauseating words because those are words. Every book says the same. They have to be. I love the line about the visionary. Helmut Kohl's line about if you have a vision, you got a great line. In America, every leader needs a vision, and every leader needs to communicate, and every leader needs to negotiate. Yada yada. It depends on the situation. I mean, your question specifically is there such a thing as a style? There's a style. Look, if I'm leading a group of scientists trying to figure out cure for the common cold, I will need certain traits and characteristics, probably arguably among them, a knowledge of science. So you take me, this exact same person, and you remove me to a different situation where my scientific skills have no relevance whatsoever, and suddenly I'm not a leader. So I'm a leader for this half hour or this hour in this room. Afterwards, you say to me, what restaurant should we go to in Munich? And I'm going to look at you, how should I? I have no clue. So it's driven by context. The style is also driven by this. What does the group need at this particular moment in time? Anybody who tells you this is the style for a leader is full of it. It's crap because it depends on the situation. And that, you know, students will ask a question, I'll say it depends, and they get very irritated, but it happens to be the truth. It does depend. One more question. Yes, last question.
Do you envision a future, short-term future, 5, 10, 20 years, where leadership power won't be gained by followers, but mitigated to machines?
So I think we discussed this morning the degree to which our knowledge of what machines will be, let's say 10 years from now, artificial intelligence and what forms that'll take. I think we really don't know. My impression of futurologists, and I thought this man, Rademacher, is that his name? I thought he was wonderful this morning. But the profession generally does not have a very good track record. The ability of people to predict events. Had you told me that in 2006 or 7, Obama was elected in 2008, had you told me in 2006 or early 7 that a man by the unheard of name of what? Barack Obama, who would be president for 8 years, I would have said, you're smoking something. The fall of the wall, 89, 90, 91, where did that come from? Was anybody predicting it? 5 minutes earlier, not to speak of 5 years earlier? We heard the story this morning of your niece who said it'll take 30 or 40 years. The financial crisis came up at dinner last night. If we were all so smart and were predicting the financial crisis, we'd be rich. So I'm very leery, especially in an area that totally unknown and unfamiliar. Any answer I give you would be a dumb one, and you should discount it. So I prefer to give you no answer other than a cautionary note about predicting the future. Our record on that is pretty miserable. So thank you very, very much.